Adolf Hitler had some good ideas, a fifth of Gen Z Americans believe, according to Daily Mail poll. This is fine. This is fine. An alarming percentage of Gen Z has lost its mind to the point of actually liking Hitler. We're going to break down this insane story and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics from an independent perspective. Without further ado, let's get into this wild Daily Mail poll that reveals some truly shocking findings about Gen Z in particular. Adolf Hitler had some good ideas, a fifth of Gen Z Americans believe, according to Daily Mail poll. The author, Wills Robinson, points out that while Adolf Hitler's reign of terror led to the murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust and some of the darkest moments in history, more than 1 in 10 Americans still somehow believe the barbaric German tyrant leader had some, quote, good ideas. Shocker, younger Americans, age 18 to 29, were more likely to believe this. The Daily Mail/JL Partners poll found that more than 1 in 5, 21% of both Gen Z and Black voters and 19% of Hispanic voters agreed with the statement. This was a survey of 1,000 likely voters that asked whether they thought Hitler had some good ideas or whether he was evil and had no redeeming features. So when I first started covering politics, and in particular polls and polling, I learned something called the 7% rule, which is essentially that no matter what you survey, you can always get 7% of the population to say something or agree to something crazy. So even if you have a poll that says, are puppies good or are puppies evil, some people will misunderstand the question or they'll just be contrarian for its own sake, and you'll still get 7% that say puppies are evil. But when you're talking about 21% or 1 in 5 Americans under age 29 actually saying that Hitler had some good ideas, that is a significant finding. Of course, you could look at it the other way and say, well, that means 4 out of 5 don't agree with that. And I guess at least we have that fact to take a little bit of solace from. But still, I mean, 1 out of 5 young people, age 18 to 29, to be so deranged and so miseducated is incredibly concerning to me. And I want to add some additional context. Of those age 18 to 29, 20% said they were unsure about the answer to the question. So all things considered, just 59% said Hitler was evil. So, in other words, only about 6 in 10 Americans age 18 to 29 firmly agreed that Hitler was evil when surveyed by the Daily Mail. You can't make this shit up. And unfortunately, this isn't exactly a one-off example. We're noticing something of a trend where young people, particularly influenced by social media and TikTok, it seems, have started to view some of history's greatest villains as actually not that bad, or even, bizarrely in some cases, as heroes. The poll results seem part of a startling trend, with Gen Z being more sympathetic towards some of history's most evil individuals. Earlier this month, TikTok was forced to remove AI-generated and translated videos of Hitler's speeches that had racked up more than 1 million views. In fairness, for TikTok, 1 million views isn't that much, all things considered. Here's the follow-up part that was disturbing to me. In December, a DailyMail.com survey found that 1 in 5 young Americans had a positive view of 9/11 mastermind and Al-Qaeda founder Osama bin Laden. The alarming survey also found that 3 in 10 Gen Z voters believed the views of the anti-Semitic leader who slaughtered thousands of innocent people were, quote, a force for good. I'm a little bit lost for words on that one, guys. 3 in 10 Gen Z voters thought Osama bin Laden's ideas were, quote, a force for good. I don't know how to help these people. I don't know how to reach these people. I mean, you have to be just remarkably warped in your perspective and miseducated beyond belief to wind up in the bizarre place where you think Osama bin Laden or Adolf Hitler had good ideas, despite the absolute terror and human suffering they inflicted at every turn throughout their lives. It's just astounding. I think the only thing we can do is talk about how we got here. How did we end up with this level of historical and civic and frankly moral illiteracy among some young people today? And I think, for one, we do have to point our finger at the education system, which is in so many ways an absolute hot mess. And it's just not producing well-rounded, well-informed graduates in the way that it's supposed to. It's just passing people along year to year. I think in many cases, the standards have fallen off of a cliff, and they're oftentimes more concerned with just graduating people to keep a high graduation rate than actually making sure they meet the basic requirements we should be expecting for them to graduate. A high school diploma has become almost meaningless at this point, frankly. And another hefty portion of the blame for this comes back to what I call social media brain rot and the wild echo chambers that many young people inhabit, where just the most extreme perspectives and worldviews are just parroted over and over again, along with total misinformation and fake news. And there's not a lot of different voices or challenging perspectives, which is one of the reasons, that I do post to TikTok, that a lot of people on the right say, oh, I can't use that app, it's Chinese spyware, or it's a left-wing hellhole. And I think the first one is overstated, but the second one is certainly true to some extent. But it's like, if we're not going to even try to put the message out there, then all these people will ever hear is this far left insane gobbledygook. And I'd rather provide an alternative. That's what I try to do with this show and with my content, at least, so that there's something more for young people to be exposed to, whether we like it or not, right? TikTok is the largest search engine for young people. They don't even go to Google anymore. They also go to TikTok and just type in their questions and queries to find out information about something. You don't have to like that fact. You can lament that fact, but it's still a fact. So the option is not, can we change how young people consume information and get their news? Can we make them read reliable sources and stop getting news from TikTok? All of that's a long-term conversation. In the short term, all we can do is deal with the realities as they are and offer better alternatives in those spaces that they are getting their information from, not wax poetic about how they should be reading newspapers or something. Okay, well, should is kind of a meaningless word in many conversations, and this is one of them. So look, I'm really disturbed by these findings and just by the state of Gen Z more broadly, but I do take hope from the fact that at least not all of us are lost, and I take it all as a challenge to provide more of an alternative and to reach more of these people with some basic common sense. Because if this poll and the many others like it are anything to go by, that is in absolute demand. But what do you guys think? Are you as alarmed and concerned by these poll findings as I am? Let me know in the comments. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on tomorrow's show. Now it's time to check in on Kamala Harris, who just released an agenda specifically pandering to black male voters. But it's not working out for her the way she hoped. Here's a clip from MSNBC that introduces the agenda that Kamala Harris just unveiled.
Just today, Harris rolled out a series of policies for what she calls her opportunity agenda for black men, which includes forgivable business loans for black entrepreneurs, more apprenticeships for black male teachers, more research for sickle cell disease and other diseases that disproportionately affect African American men. She's also calling for measures that ensure that black men have opportunities to participate as a national cannabis industry takes shape. By contrast, Donald Trump has laid out no policies that address specific concerns of most black voters. And no.
So I have many thoughts on this agenda, but first I'll just read to you guys a couple more parts of the agenda that Kamala Harris unveiled in a Twitter post outlining her plans. She wrote, "Black men deserve a president who cares about making their lives better," and then attached this list that she's calling the Opportunity Agenda for Black Men, including some of the things that MSNBC mentioned, but also, quote, protecting cryptocurrency investments so black men who make them know their money is safe, and also legalizing recreational marijuana. She also highlighted the idea that was mentioned to provide 1 million loans that are fully forgivable up to $20,000 for black entrepreneurs and others to start a business. So first and foremost, it's truly remarkable that she's even doing this at all, that she even feels the need to reach out to black voters, especially so close to an election. It's kind of a panic sign. It's kind of an admission that they're worried about black voters, black men in particular, possibly straying over to the other side in somewhat significant numbers, which isn't something Democrats have historically ever had to worry about. So I find this remarkable just on that one count alone. It really does reveal concern in Kamala Harris's camp that a significant number of black men may be walking away from them and not supporting their candidacy. Secondly, some of this is uncontroversial. I mean, I think most Americans would support the idea of doing more research into sickle cell anemia, even though it's a disease that does disproportionately affect black Americans. But I do question the extent to which black voters out there are really making their decision who to vote for around issues like that. In the same way, I think it's great if more black men become teachers, but I think the reason there are very few black male teachers is probably primarily that black men aren't interested in becoming teachers. Not that there aren't enough apprenticeship programs for them, but maybe that's an issue somehow. I just don't see that being top of mind for many black voters, honestly. And because of some of its other components, this agenda just seems incredibly cringeworthy and tone deaf. I mean, citing cryptocurrency is pandering. She's just saying, oh, black men like crypto, right? Well, I'll protect your investments. Babe, cryptocurrency websites don't ask for your race. There's nothing stopping black men from buying, trading, selling, investing, crypto, doing all that stuff like anyone else. There's no there. All you're doing is desperately pandering to black men because some pollster told you they like crypto. And I also have to raise a massive red flag about the part about small business loans for black entrepreneurs and others. What does that mean? There's only two possibilities here. Either one, she's proposing explicitly conditioning taxpayer dollars so they're only available to black men, which would be illegal and unconstitutional and just the pinnacle of equity politics, and has actually been blocked in court when they've tried to do it before as part of the Biden administration and at the state level in Democratic states. And if you ask me, it's just frankly un-American and divisive and wrong. We should have programs that help anyone in need, but not programs that are for some races and not for others. That's both unconstitutional, the violation of the Equal Protection Clause, and just un-American. That's not how we want to live in America. Most of us want a colorblind government system, not one that ever conditions benefits or punishments for one race over another. The second option is that she is just proposing a generic small business program, but then is just leaning in to say this will help black men, and it's actually not even specifically for them. She's just kind of slapping the black men label on it when it's a random program she was already promoting, which is also pandery and tone deaf. Last but not least, we've got to talk about the fact that in her 5 bullet points for what she's going to do for black men, legalize marijuana is one of them. Now, to be clear, I fully support legalizing marijuana. I'm all about it. It's personal freedom. Get the government out of here, out of our business. I don't smoke marijuana. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a free country and people should absolutely be free to do so. And I do acknowledge that there is a racial equality angle to this conversation because black and white people smoke marijuana at similar rates, but black people are more likely to get in legal trouble for it. However, there is something so tone deaf about saying, here's my plan for black men, legalize drugs. Whether you like it or not, whether there is that nuance to it or not, you are intentionally or unintentionally suggesting like black men really like drugs. And if I was a black man, most of whom don't smoke marijuana, I don't know that I would love that suggestion. And at the very least, the way it's framed is very tone deaf. Of course, that hasn't stopped Barack Obama from promoting it and lauding Kamala Harris over the plan in a tweet he posted. But much more interesting than his tweet is the lecture that Obama recently gave black men who are even considering thinking about voting for Trump, where he basically suggested they must just be sexist against women if they're possibly not going to support Kamala Harris. Take a listen to what Obama had to say.
Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. Mm-hmm. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. Mm-hmm. And so now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is. Putting women down? That's not acceptable.
Wow. I can just tell you right now, this strategy of lecturing and insulting black men for not getting in line and doing what black elites like Barack Obama think they're supposed to do is not going to work out well for the Democrats. I mean, it's just profoundly insulting and reductionist to tell black men that if they don't support Kamala Harris, they're probably just sexists, and that it is not an acceptable decision in the Lord's eyes of Barack Obama. Like, who made you the God King of black people, allowed to tell them what's acceptable and what's not for them to do at the ballot box? In reality, black men who aren't supporting Kamala may be concerned about the border crisis that's happened under the Biden administration, the huge increase in cost of living, and the economic struggles their families have faced during the Biden-Harris administration. They might find her far-left policy positions on a host of issues alien to their values. They might be concerned about foreign policy and the unstable nature of world affairs and global conflicts under this administration that Kamala Harris was a key part of. The idea that the only reason they wouldn't support Kamala Harris is because they're sexist rubes is both infantilizing and paternalizing and patently untrue. You guys know that I don't take sides in elections, and I just call balls and strikes like I see it. But if I was working for the Trump campaign, I would be actively clipping that Obama speech up and then bombarding it through ads targeted to black men specifically, because people are sick of being lectured by elites and being called bigots if they dare disagree with them. And the more Democrats double down on this approach, the more it's going to backfire. And now we're going to catch up with the left-wing political commentator Anna Kasparian, who is going viral for a clip where she explains the horrifying story and moment that finally woke her up to just how unhinged and bizarre the modern far left has become. Take a listen to this clip of Anna on the Jillian Michaels podcast, where she explains something horrible that happened to her while she was walking her dog in LA.
In 2022, it was around March. I was walking my dog. It was not quite dark yet, but the sun was setting. As I'm walking my dog, I see these two guys that were just kind of like moving around weirdly. You know, they seemed kind of manic, and their clothes were tattered. So I knew that they were probably homeless. And I also knew that they're probably on something just based on like the twitchy way they were acting. But living in LA, I mean, there's homeless people everywhere, right? So I've never had problems. I didn't think anything of it. But as I was bending down to pick up my dog's mess, one of the guys like grabs me by my hips, and he had an erection.
Oh God.
And just starts like humping me. And I didn't know what to do. Like I was terrified. I didn't have a weapon on me.
Yep.
Like I had no way of defending myself. I didn't know how far it was going to go because it's two guys. I'm by myself with my little dog. It was one of the most terrifying things ever, because I'm pretty good at defending myself. In that moment, I just knew there was no option.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And luckily, he stopped, and they just laughed at me and walked away as they were laughing at me. And so there was the fear, and then the humiliation, and weirdly shame. Like I felt ashamed for some reason. And it was awful. And it was really taking a toll on my mental health, because I have to walk my dog, right? So at least 2 or 3 times a day, I'm going outside kind of scared.
So we're going to get into the fallout from her progressive viewers and fans from this incident that made her wake up to the left's insanity, the far left at least. But first, I just have a couple things to say about this really horrible story. One, it is not some isolated incident. I've come to know many women over the years, especially when I lived in DC, who routinely had just some of the most horrible experiences being harassed by homeless people or by men on the street. And as a guy who honestly walked through the world not really thinking about those things, it opened my eyes to what women still go through and gave me an appreciation for many of the concerns they have. I've personally been harassed by homeless people in a homophobic manner, but I've never worried about this kind of sexual harassment or assault just walking down the street. And I acknowledge that in many ways that's a privilege. You'd think that just telling this story wouldn't really be controversial, right? It's just a horrible thing that happened to her. She was a victim of sexual assault, and everyone would sympathize with her, especially the progressive feminists in her audience, right? Right? Apparently not. Anna is a host for the progressive network The Young Turks, and she went on to recount how many progressive members of her audience shamed her in different ways for sharing this story and stigmatizing the unhoused, some even bizarrely accusing her of racism. Take a listen.
And so I opened up about this on the show, not really thinking much of it. And before I knew it, I'm starting to get these messages, and it's like really, really harsh stuff. And it's about how you are painting a picture of the homeless community. You know, how could you be like this? You know, these are your unhoused neighbors and they need help. A few people accused me of being racist when I had never disclosed the race of the individuals who did this to me. And in fact, they were white. And so like when they started accusing me of being racist, I'm like, wait a minute. Why are you assuming that the people who did this?
Of course.
Yeah, like, I think you might have a problem here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that woke me up. That woke me up because I'm like, oh my God.
So this was really breathtaking. Honestly, it's astounding that anybody could hear that story that Anna recounted of how she was sexually harassed and assaulted by homeless people on the street and somehow get mad at her for that situation. And look, certainly, not all Democrats or leftists or liberals are this brain broken, not at all. But the ultra woke progressive mob online absolutely is. And to me, it just shows the shortcomings of their ideology. Under this woke worldview, they really can only view the world through the lens of the critical theory, right? Where there's the oppressed and the oppressors. There's the marginalized people and the privileged people. And in this case, Anna, who's an affluent, well-educated, probably upper middle class woman, is the privileged one. And these unhoused people, because saying homeless, which just means the exact same thing, is offensive now, these unhoused people must be victims. So we can't shame them, even though in this case, they were actually the oppressors. They were the bad guys. They weren't the victims. And they're human beings with agency. And whatever bad stuff has happened to them does not justify them hurting other people. That's how I view it. But that's not how they can view things in this oppression Olympics worldview. It's just the marginalized and the privileged. And this is so bad to shame them for this rather than wanting to help them. You sound delusional. If that's your perspective, you're totally out of touch with the reality, which, frankly, a lot of the woke online progressive crowd is. So I'm sad that this happened to Anna, but I'm glad she's woken up to how crazy some of those people are, honestly. In the same way, I have to just point out how hilarious it is to me how they stumbled into this racism thing that they so often do, where they, one, cry racism like the boy who cried wolf, to the point where people stop listening and taking it seriously. Even though racism exists and is evil and should be taken seriously, they just throw that term around like candy on Halloween these days, to the point where people stop taking it seriously. And it's really unfortunate and does a disservice to the actual victims of racism that are still plentiful. But two, it's hilarious how they just assume these were non-white people. It really does remind you that accusations can be confessions. And when the woke crowd is screaming racism or like all the time, sometimes it's because they've got some racism going on inside, and so they assume that everyone else must too. Now, I still disagree with Anna Kasparian on many things. She's still left of center on so many policies that I'm sure we could debate and disagree with, but I've grown to appreciate her as a voice speaking out against the fringe left and pushing back on some of their delusional ideas about crime and police and punishment and government and society, because oftentimes people aren't able to hear things from the other side. But when somebody on their side says it, they're more open to the criticism or the pushback. So I value her as a voice in that role. I do worry, though, that at this ultra progressive network, the Young Turks, she might not last too much longer. I don't know. It's clearly causing a lot of tension that she's offering different perspectives and pushing back on some stuff. And I hope that she sticks around and she's able to continue to be on that platform and speak to that audience. But if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet on it. I think the progressive woke young staffers who run that organization will at some point revolt. And there's got to be a lot of chaos behind the scenes there. If you have a moderate person speaking facts and questioning woke narratives, that's not going to go over well on an ultra progressive network. It's just not. And some people have shamed Anna for saying, oh, it took you long enough to wake up, or it had to happen to you personally. And I understand that sentiment a little bit, but at the same time, I think it's unproductive. You don't convert people by shaming them for coming to your side, right? You have to reach out with an open hand, not a closed fist. And while I think, obviously, we should think beyond ourselves when it comes to politics, it's normal that a lot of people don't consider a different perspective until something directly affects them. That's just the way that humans work sometimes. We can be myopic, we can have tunnel vision, and I don't think shaming Anna or hating on her over that is productive or useful. But what do you guys think? Are you interested in Anna Kasparian's recent political evolution? Have you followed her career over the years? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, this woke TikToker is going viral for spreading an absolutely unhinged lie about Republicans. Let's take a listen.
Republicans want to require all women in this country to have at least one child.
Oh, I'm gonna let you finish, but I feel like if that was actually the case, I would have heard about it and not from some random lady on TikTok.
And how do we know this? Because the author of Project 2025, Kevin Roberts, writes in his new book, The Dawn's Early Light, that he doesn't believe that having a child should be a personal choice. He believes that women should be required to have children for the good of the country. And J.D. Vance wrote the foreword for the book and a rave review.
Oh, you mean the Project 2025 plan that Trump has repeatedly crapped all over and said he doesn't support. And you're just ignoring the fact that he released his own agenda that doesn't have any of the craziest parts of Project 2025 and absolutely does not have forcing women to all have one child. In fact, he's even taken a pretty moderate view on abortion and IVF and this other stuff in recent months, trying to make up the ground his party's lost on that issue. Now, for this book, first off, which is not by a Republican politician, it's by the head of a conservative think tank, and it's not like, even if the book did say what she says it says, it's not like that proves that that's what all Republicans support. It would just be what one prominent conservative intellectual thinks. It's not something most elected Republicans, or honestly, I struggle to think of one, would ever actually sign on to or support. But what's even crazier is that that's not what's actually in the book. The book isn't released yet, but I was able to find the excerpt and the quotes from it that are motivating this fear porn from Media Matters, of all places, the left-wing watchdog. And in their article about the book, Media Matters says that Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, writes that having children should not be considered a, quote, optional individual choice, but a, quote, social expectation or a transcendent gift. So, from the context of the other passages and quotes that I reviewed, what Kevin Roberts is talking about is making it a societal expectation that women should have children, rather than just some optional thing they might consider doing. That's not the government forcing women to have kids. It's a society that pressures women to conform and to have a child and to further the population growth and create a new generation. And look, I don't agree with that. I do think it should be considered an individual choice. I don't want to socially pressure people, but to say that it's the same thing as the government forcing women to have children is not true. And then to make many more leaps of logic and say that something a conservative wrote in a book that hasn't been released yet is therefore the official position of all Republicans is totally wild, absolutely unhinged nonsense. But that doesn't seem to deter our friend here.
They've actually delayed the release of the book until after the election because they know how absolutely damning it will be for people to read that, to read it. They actually put it in a book, that they think that every woman should have a child. This is where we're going, people. The writing is on the wall. They have been trying to control women forever. The men behind Project 2025, Trump, J.D. Vance, and everybody that worked for his administration are upset that women control life, and they don't like it. They're trying to take the control of life. Don't vote for them. Vote Harris Walz and Blue up and down the ballot this year, because this is a dystopian, crazy idea.
I totally agree that the government forcing women to have children is a dystopian, crazy idea, which is why I'm so glad that that's not a thing, and why I'm so concerned that you're lying to people and misleading them and spreading false narratives, fake news, and fear porn. Call me crazy, but I think it's bad to lie to people and mislead them and scare them far beyond what the facts actually support. You know, in Dune, the author Frank Herbert talks about how fear is the mind killer. And I think that's true. When people get scared, when people get afraid, their ability to think logically and rationally often becomes clouded, which is why people should be very cautious to scare people and alarm people at all, but especially cautious about doing so in ways that aren't actually justified by the facts. It's doing a profound disservice to those individuals, causing them unnecessary psychological and emotional distress, but it's also doing society a disservice because you're clouding people's rational judgment and you're swaying them based on things they shouldn't be swayed by. I don't tell people which way they should vote. I don't really care. I can still respect you as a person either way. But what I can say conclusively and firmly is that you should decide your vote based on actual facts and policy positions, not fake news and TikTok propaganda. And this whole fake alarmist approach really distracts from what I see as the many valid criticisms of the way that Republicans like J.D. Vance talk about women and talk about families and talk about choices to have a kid or not. When you take it to the nth degree and you exaggerate to the point of outright lying, you're actually undermining your ability to make legitimate criticisms of the often tone-deaf way that Republicans talk about these issues, which I've criticized at length on this show. So you're doing yourself and your own cause a disservice in addition to misinforming the public and making everything worse. Other than that, though, you're doing amazing, sweetie. What did you guys think of this wild woman's video? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering. And now, I'll read a few of your comments from the last episode before we wrap up today's show. One person writes, I vehemently disagree with Trump in regards to CBS's license, but he's just pulling a page out of the progressive playbook. Weaponize the government against your political enemies just like they did to him. Just like threatening to regulate social media for not censoring disfavored opinions. It doesn't make it right, but it does make it karma. Yeah, I understand this sentiment, but I would say that I'm a firm believer that two wrongs don't make a right, and that we lose our ability to be principled advocates of a position if we compromise that position just because the other side does. Another person writes, a group of around 20 trans activists disrupted a feminist seminar on child safeguarding in Brussels, Belgium, by flinging terracotta pots filled with cow manure at the attendees. These people are desperately insane. Oh my gosh, if you're throwing poop at people, you've lost the plot. And someone else pointed out about the bugs being released to stop the trans critical event. And now Just Stop Oil is going to do exactly the same thing. LOL, I'm calling it. No, don't give them ideas. If this becomes a thing, woke people releasing bugs at events, our society will degenerate even more than it already has. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button before you go, and do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.